July 22, 1944. The Red Army storms through the gates of Majdanek concentration camp near Lublin, Poland. What they find isn't a battlefield. It's a slaughterhouse that smells of death. Piles of human ashes, half-burned corpses, children's shoes scattered across the mud. The ovens are still warm. Soviet soldiers, men who had seen the worst of war, turn away and vomit. The nightmare was real, and the man who helped make it all possible, who turned crematoriums into instruments of sadistic pleasure, would soon face the same kind of death he had given to thousands. His name was Erich Muhsfeldt, and the way he lived and died shows how deep human cruelty can go when conscience burns away. Erich Muhsfeldt was born on February 18, 1913, in Grossenlütter, near Fulda, Germany. Nothing in his childhood hinted at what he'd become. He went to school, learned to bake bread, married young, and had a son. A simple German life. Until 1933. That year, Adolf Hitler rose to power, and everything changed. The ordinary baker joined the SA, the brown shirts. By 1937, he transferred to the SS, and by 1939, he became a full member of the Nazi Party. It wasn't ideology that drove him. It was opportunity. For men like Muhsfeldt, the new regime was a place where cruelty paid and obedience was rewarded. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, the world was thrown into chaos. Muhsfeldt joined the Esstotenkopfverband, the Death's Head units, whose task wasn't to fight soldiers, but to manage concentration camps. Their motto was simple: no pity, no mercy. At Auschwitz, where he was first stationed in 1940, Muhsfeldt learned the mechanics of extermination, the movement of prisoners from the train platform to the gas chamber, from the gas chamber to the crematorium. Everything had to run smoothly, efficiently, and those who hesitated, they were replaced. He watched people die by the hundreds, then thousands, and soon it became routine. The horror no longer touched him. In fact, it fascinated him. By November 1941, Muhsfeldt was transferred to Majdanek, near Lublin. At first, it was meant to be a labor camp, but by 1942, it evolved into a death factory. Gas chambers disguised as showers, trenches for mass shootings, and behind it all, crematoriums that burned day and night. Muhsfeldt was put in charge of those crematoriums. That's where his transformation completed. Survivors remembered him as a man who smiled while loading bodies into the furnaces. He was tall, broad-shouldered, always immaculate in his uniform. But behind that polished surface was a sadist. He didn't just follow orders. He created his own versions of hell. One story that spread through the camp like wildfire told of a young Polish woman. She was scheduled for gassing. When guards came to drag her away, she fought, scratching Muhsfeldt's face and screaming, "Why must I die?" He didn't shout back. He simply said, "You'll be burned alive for that." He ordered her tied with wire to the same metal trolley used for corpses. And then, without hesitation, he pushed her into the flames. Witnesses said her screams could be heard above the roar of the furnace. That was Erich Muhsfeldt, a man who could look directly at a burning, living human being and feel nothing but satisfaction. Late October 1943, strange orders spread through the Majdanek, Poniatowa, and Troniki camps. Jewish prisoners were forced to dig long trenches, 10 meters deep, dozens of meters long. The guards said they were for air defense. But the prisoners knew. On November 3rd to 4th, 1943, the operation began. Harvest Festival, the largest single-day massacre of Jews during the entire Holocaust. Over 43,000 people were murdered within 48 hours. Men, women, children, forced to strip naked and lie down in the trenches they had just dug. Then the machine gun started. Loudspeakers blasted cheerful music to drown out the screams. Popular songs, marches, even classical pieces. Witnesses said the killing went on for hours, the ground trembling under the weight of the dying. Muhsfeldt was there, pulling the trigger, commanding the squads, overseeing the piles of bodies. Survivors later said he looked excited, almost energized, as if he were competing with death itself. Holocaust survivor Jerzy Lang testified years later about a sight that never left him. Muhsfeldt, walking toward the crematorium, holding two small Jewish children in each hand, none older than 8. He led them inside. A few seconds later, gunshots. Then silence. When he came out, he was whistling, sometimes laughing. That became his routine. Whenever the natural death rate slowed, he'd personally select weak prisoners, sometimes children, to fill the quota. Even in a place where death was industrialized, Muhsfeldt's cruelty stood out. Muhsfeldt drank heavily. Witnesses recalled him stumbling through the camp with a bottle in one hand and a truncheon in the other. He beat prisoners for smiling, for coughing, for existing. One man was punished simply for smiling at a wagon driver. Muhsfeldt punched him in the face, broke his jaw, and kept kicking until the man's spine snapped. Another time, he shoved a wooden shovel handle down a prisoner's throat until it tore through the inside of his body. These weren't acts of discipline. They were acts of pleasure. Prisoners remembered a phrase he used often, "I'll burn you alive." It wasn't an empty threat. When prisoners saw him walking toward them, they froze. Sometimes he'd point to one at random, whisper those words, and move on. Days later, that same prisoner would disappear, his ashes added to the pile. To him, the crematorium wasn't just machinery. It was his domain, his kingdom. By July 1944, the Red Army was closing in. The Nazis began destroying evidence. Gas chambers dismantled, records burned, corpses dug up and cremated in open pits. But they couldn't erase everything. When Soviet troops entered on July 24, 1944, they found fewer than 500 survivors. Between 80,000 and 120,000 people had died there. The ovens still smelled of burning flesh. Muhsfeldt escaped before they arrived, retreating west to Auschwitz-Birkenau. But he didn't run from his work. He simply resumed it. In May 1944, Auschwitz was preparing for the arrival of hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews. The crematoria burned day and night. Muhsfeldt supervised the crews. Men who beat prisoners, dragged corpses, shoveled ashes. Witnesses said he whipped people until they collapsed, then forced others to carry them to the ovens. Sometimes he'd order victims thrown into the flames while still alive. A Hungarian Jewish doctor, Miklos Eerily, later wrote about him. Once, after executing 80 prisoners by shooting each in the back of the head, Muhsfeldt complained of headaches. When Eerily suggested it might be stress, Muhsfeldt flew into a rage. "It makes no difference whether I kill one man or 80, he said. It's all the same." One day, a 16-year-old Jewish girl was found alive among the corpses after gassing. She had somehow survived the poison. Eerily begged Muhsfeldt to let her live. He could save her. Muhsfeldt looked at him coldly. Then he took out his pistol and shot her in the neck. "There," he said. "Now she won't suffer." It wasn't mercy. It was control. He decided who lived and who died. As the Eastern Front collapsed in August 1944, Muhsfeldt was transferred to combat duty. But even on the battlefield, his cruelty followed him. After being injured, he ended up at Flossenburg concentration camp in April 1945. By then, Nazi Germany was crumbling. The camps were chaotic, overcrowded, starving. Prisoners collapsed during roll call, and guards shot them where they stood. Muhsfeldt personally executed dozens during the death marches as American troops advanced. For his service, he was awarded the War Merit Cross, second class, a medal for mass murder. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war was over, but not for Muhsfeldt. Captured by U.S. forces, he faced trial at Flossenburg in January 1947. The court found him guilty of war crimes and sentenced him to life in prison. But Poland wanted him too. His worst crimes had happened on their soil. The Americans handed him over. On November 24, 1947, the Auschwitz trial began in Krakow. Dozens of survivors testified. Their stories painted the same picture: a man without remorse, without emotion, without soul. One Polish prisoner recalled something Muhsfeldt had said during the war: "If you Poles weren't such fools, we wouldn't have to burn you." Now, those same Poles sat in judgment. The verdict came in December 1947. Guilty of crimes against humanity. Sentence: death by hanging. January 24, 1948. Montelupich Prison, Krakow. Erich Muhsfeldt, 34 years old, stood in a small, cold execution chamber. The method chosen was deliberate, a cruel echo of his own crimes. Instead of a gallows, there were metal hooks mounted on the wall, the same kind he used at Majdanek. A wooden stool beneath, a rope above. They placed a noose around his neck. He didn't speak, didn't plead. Then, the stool was kicked away. He didn't drop far enough for a clean break. His neck didn't snap. He strangled slowly, gasping, choking, feet kicking at the air. For minutes, he hung there, twitching, until his body went still. His corpse wasn't buried. It was sent to Jagiellonian University to be used as a dissection specimen for medical students. A fitting end for a man who had treated human life as disposable matter. His wife had died in an Allied bombing raid. His son, sent to the Russian front, never returned. The line of Erich Muhsfeldt ended there, extinguished, just like the fires he once fed. The ovens he oversaw were silent now. The smoke had cleared, but the smell lingered, in the soil, in the brick, in the memories of those who survived. Some said that when the Soviets entered Majdanek, they found bones still glowing from the heat. Others claimed the ashes in the pits were so thick they looked like snowdrifts. What's certain is that men like Muhsfeldt believed they'd never be held accountable. They thought the Reich would last 1,000 years. It didn't. He lasted 34. In the end, Muhsfeldt wasn't a monster born from nowhere. He was a man, ordinary, even dull, who found meaning in cruelty. That's what makes him terrifying, because it means anyone, given the right uniform and the wrong cause, can become what he was. The Holocaust wasn't just the work of ideologues or madmen. It was built by hands like his, steady, obedient, methodical. Hands that once baked bread and later burned people. And when those hands finally stopped moving, hanging limp from a rope in a Polish prison, justice, however imperfect, had done its work. But the question remains, if someone like Erich Muhsfeldt could exist once, could someone like him exist again?